The origin of this amendment came on March 3rd, 2009, when, as a member of the Budget Committee, I asked the chairman of the Fed, Bernanke, a very simple question. I asked him if he would tell me and the committee and the American people which financial institutions received over $2 trillion in zero interest or near zero interest loans during the start of the economic crisis, during the bailout period. Some $2 trillion of taxpayer money was lent out, and my question was, Mr. Chairman, who received that money? I don't think that that is an unfair question. You and I, Madam President, have heard great debates here on the floor of the Senate about $5 million or $10 million. To ask who received over $2 trillion in zero or near zero interest loans is something that I think should be answered by the Fed, and they should make that information public. But Mr. Bernanke said no. He gave his reasons, and on that very day, I introduced legislation that would require the Fed to put this information on its website, make it public, just like Congress required the Treasury Department to do with respect to the $700 billion TARP program. You may like TARP, you may not like TARP, you may vote for it, you may not, but the information about who received the money, when it was paid back, etc., is right there on the website of the Treasury Department. Madam President, this $2 trillion in zero or near zero interest loans does not belong to the Fed. It belongs to the American people, and the American people have a right to know where trillions of dollars of their taxpayer dollars are going. That's not complicated. You don't need an MBA from Wharton to know that. And that is why millions of Americans, whether you're conservative, whether you're progressive, or whether you are in between, have come together to say that we need transparency at the Fed. Madam President, this amendment not only requires that the Fed tell us who has received the $2 trillion it lent out in the midst of the financial crisis, but similar to the language incorporated in the House bill, it's already in the House bill, it calls for an audit of the Fed by the GAO. And as we all know, the GAO is the nonpartisan Government Accountability Office, who does a great job in trying to figure out where there is waste and fraud within our government. And that's it, Madam President. This is a very, very simple, short amendment. I think it's 5 pages. It calls for transparency at the Fed and a straightforward audit. Who got what? When did they get it? On what basis? On what terms? Who was at the meetings? Who made the decisions? And were there conflicts of interest? Simple, factual questions that the American people deserve answers to. That's what it is. It's not complicated. Madam President, I understand that this amendment will not be supported by everyone. Some may suggest inaccurately that this amendment, and I quote, because I've heard this statement already, takes away the independence of the Federal Reserve and puts monetary policy into the hands of Congress, end of quote. Let me address those concerns by simply reading exactly what is in the amendment. This is not complicated. And I quote from page 4 of the amendment. This is what it says. I don't think it could be more straightforward than this. Quote, nothing in this amendment shall be construed as interference in or dictation of monetary policy by the Federal Reserve System, by the Congress, or the Government Accountability Office, end of quote. You can't be more straightforward than the language in this amendment. So when people tell you that this amendment is going to interfere and have Congress dictate monetary policy, it is simply not true. Madam President, and here's a very interesting point that I know a lot of senators have raised in different contexts. But if the goal of the huge amounts of money in Fed loans, trillions of dollars in Fed loans to large financial institutions, was to achieve the goal of getting credit flowing to small and medium-sized businesses that were cash-starved, that were crying out for credit, why is small business lending in free fall? What happened? We gave the large financial institutions trillions of dollars, presumably to get out to small, medium-sized businesses. They haven't gotten it. Question. I think it's a reasonable question. I'm not the only one who's asking it. How much of those zero interest or near zero interest loans that these huge financial institutions receive from the Fed was simply invested in federal government bonds earning an interest rate of 3 or 4%? In other words, are we looking at a huge scam? And I can't think of a better word. You give these large financial institutions trillions of dollars in zero-interest loans in order to enable them to provide desperately needed loans to small and medium-sized businesses so those businesses can expand and create jobs, yet that appears not to be happening. Question, how much of those several trillion dollars in loans simply went from the Fed to the financial institutions in order to purchase government-backed obligations at 3 or 4%. And if that's the case, that's just giving away money. Zero interest coming in, you get 3 or 4% guaranteed by the faith and credit of the United States of America. Well, you know what? I don't know. I don't know how much. I suspect, other people suspect, that that was done. How much? I don't know. Maybe the GAO can tell us. I should also mention to you that as part of the budget resolution debate in April of 2009, the Senate voted overwhelmingly in support of this basic concept by a vote of 59 to 39. In the House of Representatives, this concept passed the House Financial Services Committee by a vote of 43 to 26 and was incorporated into the House version of Wall Street reform that was approved by the House last December. In other words, a lot of what we are saying here, what I'm talking about, is in the House bill, not a radical concept. This idea has the support of the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, who said that Congress should ask the Fed to put this information, quote, on the Internet like they've done with the recovery package and the budget, end of quote. And that's what this amendment does. So let me conclude by saying this. We now have 59 senators having voted for transparency, 320 members of the House, and 2 U.S. courts. All we want to know is who got trillions of dollars. That's what we want to know. We want to know also on what basis, on what terms, who was at the meetings where key decisions were made.